Rachel met Brian in college, and from the start, their relationship was an unlikely one. Rachel was a first-year student, a down-to-earth girl from a modest family with younger siblings she often looked after. Brian, on the other hand, was 2 years ahead of her and came from a wealthy family in a nearby town. He'd never paid her much attention before, but as they both settled into college life, a friendship quickly turned into something deeper. The connection was unexpected but genuine. For Rachel, this was her first experience of true love, and she jumped into the relationship wholeheartedly, despite her mother's cautious warnings. Her mother, Diane, was concerned about the significant differences in their backgrounds and lifestyles. Diane reminded Rachel repeatedly that Brian's family might not see her as a proper match, but Rachel brushed off her concerns. "We're not living in the 18th century, Mom," she would say, her eyes bright with optimism. "Brian and I love each other, that's all that matters." But Rachel couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her mother's concerns had some weight. She knew Brian's family was well off. His father, Stephen, held a prestigious position in town, and his mother, Linda, was known for her social standing and high expectations. Despite this, Rachel felt confident in her relationship, believing that their love would overcome any disapproval. Their relationship continued to grow, and before long, they were talking about marriage. Rachel was excited to meet Brian's parents formally and hoped to make a good impression. She spent hours preparing, choosing a dress that was elegant yet simple, wanting to show respect without appearing too extravagant. But the moment she walked into Brian's home, she felt Linda's disapproval. Linda's gaze was cold, appraising Rachel with a look that spoke volumes. At dinner, Linda wasted no time in asking about Rachel's family, pointedly inquiring about their financial situation and making subtle remarks about their modest lifestyle. Rachel tried to maintain her composure, but each comment cut deeper, leaving her feeling humiliated and out of place. After dinner, Linda continued her interrogation. She asked if Rachel planned to finish her degree, subtly hinting that her son needed someone with ambition. The final blow came when Linda said, with a faint smile, "You know, Brian deserves the best life can offer." Rachel left that evening feeling crushed. She tried to tell herself that Linda's opinion didn't matter, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her relationship with Brian would always face resistance from his family. She confided in her mother that night, sharing the hurtful words Linda had directed at her. Diane, with a weary sigh, simply said, "I warned you, sweetheart. Love is beautiful, but reality is harsh." Despite her mother's warnings, Rachel remained committed to Brian, determined to prove Linda wrong. She wasn't just in love, she was ready to build a life with Brian, no matter the obstacles. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would test her resolve and commitment in ways she had never expected. As Rachel and Brian's relationship continued, they moved past the painful first encounter with his family, focusing on their life together. They shared dreams of the future, and Rachel began to believe that they could build a life on their own terms, despite Linda's disapproval. Brian reassured her that he loved her and was committed to their relationship, promising that his mother's opinion wouldn't come between them. A few months later, Rachel discovered she was pregnant. She was thrilled, seeing this as the beginning of the family they had talked about, a symbol of the bond they shared. Though unexpected, the news filled her with joy and hope. Brian was overjoyed too, and they excitedly began making plans, imagining their life as parents and preparing for the changes ahead. Despite her excitement, Rachel was nervous about telling Brian's family, particularly Linda. She hoped that the news of a grandchild might soften Linda's heart, giving her a reason to look past their differences and accept her. Rachel wanted her child to be part of a united family, and she dreamed of a future where her baby would have the love and support of both families. But when the time came to tell Linda, things did not go as Rachel had hoped. They invited her over for a quiet dinner, hoping to share the news in a setting that felt personal and intimate. Rachel nervously set the table, her heart pounding as she thought of how Linda might react. When they finally shared the news, Linda's reaction was cold and immediate. She looked at Rachel with a frown, her eyes narrowing as if trying to detect some hidden motive. "Well, that's quite sudden," she said, her tone sharp. She turned to Brian, barely acknowledging Rachel's presence. Are you sure this is what you want, Brian? You're both so young, and you have your whole life ahead of you. A baby could complicate things. Rachel was stunned. Instead of the warm reception she had hoped for, Linda's words felt like an accusation, as if the pregnancy was somehow a scheme. Linda continued, her voice laced with disdain, I just hoped this wasn't a hasty decision, Brian. You have a lot of potential, and I'd hate for you to throw it away so soon. Brian tried to reassure his mother, telling her that he and Rachel were prepared and committed to raising the baby together. But Linda wasn't convinced. She cast a final, dismissive look at Rachel before excusing herself early, leaving a thick silence in her wake. That night, Rachel confided in her mother, who listened with quiet sympathy. I don't know what to do, Mom, Rachel admitted, fighting back tears. I wanted her to be happy for us. For our child. Diane sighed, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Some people just can't see past their own expectations, Rachel. But this is your family now, and you're doing the right thing by standing by Brian. Let Linda come around on her own time. In the end, it's her loss if she can't. The experience was disheartening, but Rachel felt a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't going to let Linda's disapproval overshadow the joy she felt about becoming a mother. She resolved to focus on her growing family, and, with Brian by her side, she held on to the hope that they could prove Linda wrong. For now, she would find strength in her love for Brian and the life they were creating, regardless of who supported them. As Rachel's pregnancy progressed, she focused on building a life with Brian, hoping that with time, Linda's attitude might soften. Brian assured her that his mother would eventually accept the situation, and Rachel clung to the hope that once the baby arrived, Linda might welcome her grandchild with open arms. But the months went by without any signs of change. Instead of warming up, Linda grew more distant, only calling her son occasionally, her conversations marked by a tense politeness toward Rachel. One evening, as Rachel was resting, there was a sudden knock at the door. She was startled to find Linda standing on the porch, holding herself with her usual air of cold authority. Brian wasn't home, so Rachel invited Linda in, wondering what had brought her by so unexpectedly. Linda didn't waste time on small talk. Instead, she sat down across from Rachel, her eyes hard. Rachel, she began, her voice low but sharp, I came here because I'm worried about Brian's future. He's young, and he has so much potential. I want him to have every opportunity in life, but I'm concerned that this pregnancy is a distraction. Rachel stiffened, already feeling the familiar sting of Linda's disapproval. She fought to keep her voice steady. Brian and I are committed to each other, and we're excited to become parents. We both want this, Linda. Linda's expression didn't change. She leaned in, her voice colder than ever. I don't think you understand. Brian has a future that could be ruined if he's tied down too early. A baby will hold him back, Rachel. And frankly, I think you're making a mistake by bringing a child into this situation. Rachel's hands clenched in her lap, but she refused to look away. This is our choice, Linda. Brian and I are ready to start a family, and we're prepared to work through any challenges that come our way. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. After a long pause, she spoke again, but this time, her tone was harsher, each word laced with bitterness. Rachel, I'll be blunt. You don't come from the same world as Brian. He has opportunities you'll never understand, and he deserves someone who can elevate him, not hold him back. She paused, glancing at Rachel's growing belly. Have you considered other options? Rachel felt her stomach turn, realizing exactly what Linda was implying. The audacity of Linda's suggestion was beyond belief. She looked directly at Linda, her voice calm but laced with anger. I would never do that. This child is ours, and we're going to raise it together, whether you approve or not. Linda's eyes narrowed, but she quickly composed herself, rising from the chair. Well, I suppose I can't stop you, she said icily. But just know that if Brian's life is ruined because of this, I'll know exactly who to blame. Without another word, Linda turned and walked out, leaving Rachel shaken and filled with anger. She sat there for a long moment, trying to steady her emotions. The encounter had been far more hostile than she'd anticipated, and she felt exhausted from the effort it took to stand up to Linda's demands. When Brian returned that evening, Rachel told him everything. His face darkened, and he was furious at his mother's behavior. "I can't believe she would say that to you," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "You're carrying our child, Rachel, and I want this as much as you do. I'll talk to her." Despite his reassurances, Rachel felt an ache that couldn't be easily soothed. She knew Brian's love was genuine, but Linda's harsh words lingered in her mind, casting a shadow over the happiness she had felt about the pregnancy. She resolved to focus on the life she and Brian were creating together, determined to shield their child from the resentment that seemed to surround them. The visit had marked a turning point in Rachel's relationship with Linda, leaving her with little hope that Linda would ever fully accept her. But Rachel was more determined than ever to protect her family, even if it meant facing Linda's disapproval for years to come. The months went by, and as Rachel's pregnancy progressed, she and Brian decided it was time to get married. They wanted to make their commitment official before their baby arrived, envisioning a life built on mutual love and respect, independent of anyone else's opinion. Knowing Linda wouldn't support a wedding, especially under these circumstances, they chose to keep things simple and intimate, inviting only their closest friends and Rachel's family. Rachel wore a modest dress, her growing belly proudly showing as she walked down the aisle of a small, cozy chapel. She felt a sense of calm and joy as she looked at Brian, who was waiting for her with a warm smile. Despite everything they had faced, they were both filled with hope, determined to start their life together on a foundation of love and resilience. During the ceremony, Rachel noticed her mother, Diane, watching her with teary eyes and a proud smile. Diane had supported Rachel through everything, offering strength when she needed it most. Rachel was grateful for the stability and love her mother provided, and as she exchanged vows with Brian, she promised herself she would create a family that reflected those same values. This was her chance to create something stable and strong, free from the judgment and drama that Linda had brought into her life. After the ceremony, they held a small reception at Rachel's parents' home. The atmosphere was joyful, filled with laughter, heartfelt toasts, and good food. Brian and Rachel shared a quiet moment together on the back porch, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams for the future. "I know things aren't easy with my mom," Brian said, holding Rachel's hand. "But I'm committed to you, to us. We'll build a life together, no matter what anyone else thinks." Rachel smiled, grateful for his words. "We're starting our own family now, Brian. I want our child to grow up with love and support, just like my mom gave me. We'll give them the life they deserve." The couple spent the evening surrounded by the warmth of family and friends, feeling for the first time like they were truly stepping into a future that was theirs alone. Despite Linda's absence, the day was perfect, a small oasis of happiness that Rachel held close to her heart. For the first time, she felt the peace and stability she had always wanted, unclouded by the disapproval that had followed her relationship with Brian. But as they returned home that night, Rachel couldn't shake the thought of Linda's reaction when she found out about the wedding. She knew it was only a matter of time before Linda made her disapproval known, and Rachel braced herself for what was sure to be a difficult conversation. However, standing beside Brian as her husband, she felt stronger, knowing that no matter what happened, they were in this together. Their wedding day marked a quiet yet powerful milestone, a testament to their resilience in the face of judgment and doubt. Together, they had chosen love over fear, and Rachel was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with Brian by her side. After the wedding, Rachel and Brian settled into their new life together, preparing for the arrival of their baby. Their tiny apartment was filled with baby books, cribs, and onesies gifted by friends and family. Despite the modest surroundings, Rachel felt a deep sense of contentment. She was excited to become a mother and create a loving home with Brian. However, Linda's disapproval hung over them like a storm cloud. Though she hadn't attended the wedding, she sent a letter to Brian afterward, expressing her disappointment in his choices. Rachel wasn't surprised, but she still felt the sting. Linda made it clear she didn't support the marriage, claiming it was doomed due to Rachel's background and the unexpected pregnancy. Brian assured Rachel that he'd cut ties with his mother if necessary, but Rachel insisted they keep the lines of communication open. She didn't want to drive a wedge between him and his family, even if it meant dealing with Linda's relentless judgment. When their daughter, Emma, was born, Rachel hoped that Linda might soften. They sent Linda pictures, and Brian invited her to visit, hoping the baby would bring some warmth to their strained relationship. Linda accepted the invitation, but her attitude remained cold and detached. She greeted the baby with a brief smile, but she couldn't resist making digs at Rachel's parenting choices. Each comment, from the choice of baby clothes to the arrangement of their tiny apartment, was laced with criticism. Linda would casually suggest that Brian and the baby would be better off if they lived in a more suitable environment. Brian was often away, working extra hours to support the family, leaving Rachel alone to face Linda's visits. The criticism became a regular part of Rachel's day. Linda would drop by unexpectedly, inspect their living conditions, and leave Rachel feeling inadequate. Linda's visits drained her, but Rachel kept her composure, refusing to give Linda the satisfaction of seeing her affected. She knew that standing her ground was essential, not just for her own dignity, but to ensure that her daughter grew up in an environment free from negativity. One evening, after another tense visit from Linda, Rachel finally broke down. She poured out her frustration to Brian, expressing how helpless and undermined she felt. "She's trying to make me feel like a failure," Rachel confessed, her voice trembling. "No matter what I do, she doesn't see me as good enough for you or Emma." Brian held her close, his voice filled with regret. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. You don't deserve this, and you're doing an amazing job as a mother. I'll talk to her again. She needs to understand that this is our family, not hers to control." That night, Brian made a decision to set boundaries with his mother. He was clear with Linda, telling her that while she was welcome to visit, the criticism had to stop. He reminded her that Rachel was his wife and Emma's mother, and that if she couldn't respect their choices, her visits would have to end. Linda was furious, accusing Brian of abandoning his real family, but he remained firm. He knew that his loyalty was to the family he was building with Rachel, and he wasn't willing to let his mother's disapproval ruin it. The confrontation marked a turning point. Linda continued to disapprove, but Brian's clear stance made her visits less frequent and the criticism quieter. Rachel finally began to feel a sense of control in her own home, and her confidence grew. She knew there would always be challenges with Linda, but with Brian's support, she felt ready to face them together. Just as Rachel and Brian were settling into a rhythm with their new family, tragedy struck in a way they could never have anticipated. One afternoon, Rachel received a call from the hospital. Brian and his father, Stephen, had been in a serious car accident. Brian had been driving his father back from a work meeting when their car lost control on the highway and collided with a guardrail. Rachel's heart sank as she listened to the nurse explain that Stephen had been critically injured and was in intensive care. Brian, though conscious, had sustained multiple fractures and would require several surgeries and months of rehabilitation. Rachel rushed to the hospital, her mind racing with worry and fear. When she arrived, she found Linda already there, pale and shell-shocked. The sight of Linda's vulnerability caught Rachel off guard. Gone was the stern woman who constantly scrutinized her. Now, Linda was a mother and a wife, watching her world fall apart. Rachel approached her, unsure of what to say, but Linda looked up, her face softening just a bit. Linda managed a brief nod, acknowledging Rachel's presence. They both sat in silence, united in their worry for Brian. For once, their differences seemed insignificant in the face of the shared pain of seeing their loved ones hurt. Over the next few hours, Rachel stayed by Brian's side, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. The doctors explained his recovery would be long and difficult, and that he might not regain full mobility. Stephen's injuries, however, were far more severe. Later that night, he passed away from his injuries, leaving the family reeling. The loss was a devastating blow, especially for Linda, who clung to Rachel's arm as she received the news. For a brief moment, Linda allowed herself to lean on Rachel, her grief breaking down the walls that had kept them apart. Rachel held her, offering comfort despite everything that had passed between them. In the days that followed, Rachel took on the role of caregiver for Brian, balancing her responsibilities as a mother with the demanding needs of his recovery. The physical and emotional toll was overwhelming, but she was determined to help him heal. She became his advocate, coordinating with doctors, managing his medications, and guiding him through the early stages of physical therapy. Brian was often in pain, frustrated by his limitations, but Rachel's unwavering support became his anchor. Linda, however, distanced herself, sinking into her grief. She was rarely around to help, struggling to cope with the loss of her husband. The old resentment resurfaced, but Rachel pushed it aside, choosing to focus on Brian and her daughter, Emma. She refused to let Linda's absence break her resolve. Instead, she grew stronger, finding new depths of patience and resilience. The accident marked a painful chapter for the family, but it also revealed Rachel's strength and dedication. Slowly, Brian began to make progress, and though his recovery would be long, Rachel's commitment never wavered. She knew that her love and determination were the foundation of their family, and she was prepared to face whatever came next. In the months following the accident, Brian's recovery was slow and challenging, but Rachel's unwavering support helped him through every painful step. She managed everything: his physical therapy sessions, doctor's appointments, and the daily care for Emma. Brian was deeply grateful, his love for her only growing as he saw how much she sacrificed to keep their family together. Meanwhile, Linda remained largely absent, her grief over Stephen's death isolating her even further. She avoided family gatherings and kept her distance from both Rachel and Brian, unable to confront the reality of her husband's death and her son's long recovery. But, as the months passed, Linda's anger began to fade, replaced by a painful awareness of the sacrifices Rachel was making. One afternoon, after nearly half a year of silence, Linda called Rachel, asking if she could visit Brian. Surprised but hopeful, Rachel agreed, sensing that this could be an opportunity for reconciliation. That evening, Linda arrived with a humble, almost apologetic demeanor that Rachel had never seen before. She sat quietly beside Brian, her eyes filled with sorrow and remorse as she watched him struggle to sit up and greet her. Linda took a deep breath, finally breaking the silence. "I can't believe everything you've been through," she said, her voice wavering. "And I can't believe I wasn't here to help." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Rachel. "I owe you an apology for so much. You've done more for my son than I ever gave you credit for. I see that now." Rachel was taken aback by Linda's words, unsure of how to respond. This was the first time Linda had ever acknowledged her efforts or shown any understanding of the challenges Rachel had faced. Linda continued, her voice filled with regret, "I judged you unfairly. I was so focused on what I thought was best for Brian that I couldn't see what was right in front of me, a strong, dedicated woman who's given everything to take care of him." Tears pricked Rachel's eyes, and she felt a mixture of relief and compassion as she listened to Linda's words. "Thank you, Linda," Rachel replied softly. "I've only ever wanted what's best for Brian and Emma, and I wanted you to be part of that. We're a family, and family is about supporting each other, no matter what." Linda nodded, wiping her eyes. She reached for Rachel's hand, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to be there for you both now, to support Brian's recovery and to be a better grandmother to Emma. I can't change the past, but I hope I can be part of the future." Rachel accepted Linda's gesture, feeling the weight of years of tension begin to lift. Over the next few weeks, Linda made a genuine effort to help with Brian's recovery, visiting regularly and offering assistance wherever she could. She spent time with Emma, forming a bond with her granddaughter that she had long resisted. Slowly, Rachel saw the beginnings of a new Linda, one who was finally learning to put family before pride. The reconciliation was gradual, but real. Rachel remained cautious, but she allowed herself to hope that they could finally find peace. For the first time, the entire family was united, not by obligation or resentment, but by genuine support and love. Brian's healing continued, bolstered by the presence of both the women who cared most about him, and Rachel found herself looking toward the future with a newfound sense of optimism. Through her patience, resilience, and love, Rachel had brought her family together. They had faced loss, conflict, and hardship, but out of those challenges, they were building something new, a family grounded in respect and understanding. As Linda's apology transformed into genuine support, Rachel knew that this was the new beginning they had all been waiting for. Months after Linda's heartfelt apology, Rachel could feel her family finally settling into a new era of peace and unity. Brian's recovery was progressing steadily. He was able to walk with a cane, and though he still had a long way to go, his strength and determination were inspiring. With Linda now a supportive presence, Rachel found herself surrounded by a family that felt whole for the first time. Linda began to truly integrate herself into their lives. She would bring meals to help out with Emma, share stories about Stephen with Brian to keep his father's memory alive, and even offer Rachel small gestures of appreciation, an unexpected coffee, a heartfelt note, or simply a hug on a difficult day. Rachel felt the lingering resentment melt away, replaced by a sense of closeness she hadn't thought possible. One afternoon, while visiting the family, Linda watched as Rachel played with Emma in the living room. A look of quiet pride crossed Linda's face as she saw how Rachel had grown into a devoted wife and mother, someone who had held her family together through every trial. She turned to Brian, who was sitting beside her, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Brian," Linda began softly, "you've got yourself a remarkable wife. I should have seen that sooner. I don't think I could have made it through everything without her. None of us could have." Brian nodded, his face filled with gratitude. "I know, Mom. She's been our rock. And honestly, I think we're stronger now because of it." He looked over at Rachel, his heart full as he watched her with Emma. "She's made me see what family truly means." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so glad you found her, Brian. And I'm sorry for everything I put you both through. I can only hope I can be the mother and grandmother you both deserve now." Later that evening, after Linda left, Rachel and Brian sat together on the couch, reflecting on how far they had come. Rachel leaned into Brian, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, and they watched as Emma played nearby, filling their home with laughter. "Do you think we'll ever look back on all this and feel grateful?" Rachel asked quietly, as though she could hardly believe the peace they now had. Brian nodded. "I think we already are. We've been through more than most, but look at us now. We're stronger, closer, and I think, in some way, even Linda's come to see what really matters." Rachel smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. She had fought for this family, through every setback and moment of doubt, and now, they were finally living the life they had envisioned. Linda's support had transformed from reluctant tolerance to genuine affection, and Rachel felt secure in knowing that their family was no longer just a collection of people but a unit bound by love, respect, and shared experience. As the days went on, Rachel continued to grow her family and their home with warmth and resilience. She reopened the dreams she had once put on hold, confident that her family was now a source of strength rather than a battlefield. Brian's healing progressed steadily, Linda's role as a grandmother blossomed, and Rachel found herself fulfilled, both as a mother and a woman who had reclaimed her life. Together, they had rebuilt a life from the ashes of conflict, creating a family founded on genuine love and understanding. Rachel knew there would always be challenges, but she also knew that they would face them together, as a family bound by something deeper than circumstance. A true commitment to each other and the life they had all worked so hard to create.